Hello, my name is Linda Braden and I'm CEO of SecureBioMed Evaluations. I've been in the medical device industry for over 25 years. My company is a consulting company who does engineering, regulatory, and quality support for medical device and biologic companies. I hold a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Mercer University School of Engineering, along with a Master's of Science and a PhD in Mechanical Engineering with a specialization in bioengineering from Georgia Institute of Technology. In my role at SBME, I have extensive experience in understanding and executing studies necessary for FDA clearance and approval of medical devices. Imagine a world where every medical device, drug, or healthcare system was designed with thoughtful consideration for human interaction. That would be the world Human Factors Studies aims to create. Today, we'll explore the critical role of human factors study in FDA regulations, understanding its significance on enhancing product safety, efficacy, and user experience. I will review FDA's expectation in regards to human factors study and discuss the importance of considering human factors in product design and development. I will also review examples of how human factors studies have improved product design and user experience in various industries. Finally, I will review, in my opinion, what is the best practices for engaging with FDA when a human factors study is needed. FDA recognizes the importance of human factors studies in ensuring safety, efficacy, and the usability of medical products. Human factors studies, also known as human factors engineering or usability studies, involve assessing how humans interact with medical devices, drugs, and other healthcare products. Below, I provided two critical links that are FDA's guidances on performing human factors studies. They clearly outline what FDA's expectations are, and I hope you find them valuable as you continue on your human factors journey. In this next section, I will lay out guidelines for FDA's expectations for human factors studies. As stated previously in this presentation, FDA has several guidance documents that outline their current thinking on how human factors studies should be done and when human factors studies should be done. As you can see illustrated in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, there's an illustration that is taken from one of FDA's guidance documents. This pictorial clearly correlates the typical inputs to a device use as defined by device users, use environments, and device user interfaces. These inputs work together to either create correct use or an error in use depending on the design of the device. In regards to device users, the question that should be asked are who will be using this device? Is this a trained physician or is this a patient using a device at home? Another question to consider is the user's level of experience. Even with physicians, you can have very different experienced physicians, someone who does this procedure on an everyday basis, or you could have a more rural physician who potentially only does this procedure once a month, for example. Those two physicians have the same base training from medical school, but their level of experience is completely different. Training also plays a role in human factor evaluations. Specifically, what is the level of training for the user if your device is very complicated? If your device is complicated, you may need to supply hands-on training to your users before they're allowed to use the device on their own. Device use environments also have to be taken into account. Is this for a home use or will this be used in a very busy surgical suite? Is this a noisy or quiet environment? Many studies have been done, for example, to show that audible alarms are not nearly as effective in a noisy, chaotic environment. Is the device to be used when the user is stressed? For example, if you have an EpiPen that a home user needs to use when they're already exhibiting symptoms of shortness of breath and anaphylactic shock, the device needs to be very easy to use because they're not thinking well as they would be normally thinking. Similarly, this also needs to be taken into account in a hospital situation. It is much harder for physicians and healthcare providers to do their job effectively in a very chaotic emergency room situation versus a quiet doctor's office. Finally, you may want to take into account the device user interface. Is the interface intuitive or is it complicated? It may be intuitive to you, but it may be very complicated for someone who's less familiar with the system. Does the interface give your user the best opportunity for success? How the interface is designed can prompt a user to make good choices or can lead a user down the wrong road, resulting in life-threatening mistakes. As you design your human factors study, you need to keep in mind that this will be part of your risk management file. FDA has the expectation that the design of your human factors study focuses on a risk-based approach. It's not enough to consider how the device or the components of the device might fail, as we would in a design FMEA. The medical device developer needs to consider how the user can cause the device to fail or give an inaccurate result. Examples of use risk are things like the device exceeds the ability of the user. Is the device too complicated, or does the normal user not have enough training to successfully use the device? Is the device inconsistent with the user's expectation? For example, if there is a similar device on the market that does the same function of your device, but your device works in a very different way than the other devices on the market, the user interface becomes critical to ensure successful use of the device. In fact, FDA expects a human factor or usability study if you're changing the general medical practice because you're challenging the user's intuitive expectation based on how they've used other devices. You also have to take into account the impact of the environment. Noise distractions or constant interruptions while performing a task are one of the key reasons for misuse of a device. The risk can also be user dependent. As stated previously, the level of training can and will impact the use. As you define your user population for your human factors study, you may have to test your device with multiple use groups. That's actually very common. As I mentioned earlier, the user and the device work successfully together when the interface is well designed. The user is essentially an input to the device. For the device to work as intended, FDA requires that the interface facilitates actions that do not create unintended risk for the patient. As you start developing your human factors protocol, it's important to define device users and the environments very accurately. On the left, I've listed guidelines of things to consider while you develop and define your user groups. It's very common for human factors studies to have multiple user groups that all participate in the final testing. As you write your protocol for your human factors study, you also need to take into account realistic use environments. The environment for the testing should be as realistic as possible. FDA expects that your human factors testing protocol takes into account your users and the environment, and that you have appropriately justified the choices you made during the development of your protocol. When doing a human factors evaluation, there are two key approaches. First, we have an analytical approach. This approach assesses the user interaction with the device and is most effective when applied early in the development process. A common analytical approach is a task approach. This is essentially a listing of a task and evaluation of potential user errors during the design process. Another analytical tool is a heuristic analysis. This is a device evaluation performed by a human factor specialist to evaluate the user interface and identify weaknesses. The third type of analytical assessment is an expert review. This is performed by individuals with the expertise in a certain area or device, but they may not have any specific experience with human factor design. The ideal way to utilize the analytical tool is to initiate this type of evaluation early in the process. Troubleshooting each task coupled with feedback from both a device and a human factors expert is a very powerful combination for a well-designed device. Another approach to the human factor analysis is the empirical approach. This approach identifies potential use-related hazards from the device with user experiences with the device. Typically, early in the design process, contextual inquiry is performed where the designers observe users interacting with similar devices. This observational activity with similar devices is the first step to a great design for the user interface. Once the subject device is developed, interviewers are often used with focus groups. The focus groups may use prototype devices and then question the potential users about the device. Finally, the most powerful empirical approach, in my opinion, is the formative evaluation. This is where you observe users interacting with the actual device. In a formative study, you can engage with the users to ask specific questions about why they made the choices they made. This is a very powerful way to fine-tune user interfaces, including labeling and instructions for use. During my 25 years of working in the medical device space, I've used both analytical and empirical approaches with FDA to support usability claims for a device. Although both approaches can be successful independently, the most powerful approach is a combination of everything we've just talked about. An analysis of the task, an evaluation by a human factors expert, coupled with an evaluation by an expert on the device, create a great foundation. Once the device is developed, watching and interacting with users via a formative evaluation is a critical step in fine-tuning the user interface before the final human factors protocol is executed, which is what is submitted to FDA. All right, now that we've gone through the details of a human factors study, it's time for some fun things. Let's talk about some case studies. When does FDA expect a human factors analysis to be performed to support a submission? Our first example is going to be an EpiPen. These are those auto injectors for emergency treatments. So auto injectors are life-saving devices used to treat severe allergic reactions. However, the effectiveness of this device relies heavily on the ease of use during an emergency situation. FDA expected a human factor study to be done for this device. The human factor study evaluated the usability of a new auto injector. Participants of varying levels of familiarity were chosen, and the users had diverse demographics. The initial human factors study found that there was confusion over the activation mechanism of this new pen, and the users had difficulty delivering the correct dose under a stressful situation. The manufacturer went back to the drawing room and made some design modifications and repeated the study. The final design was successfully used with none of the issues seen in the initial evaluation. The final substantive report was used for a successful FDA submission, and even more importantly than getting FDA clearance, the product was successful in the market with very positive post-market feedback from its patients. Our next example is an infusion pump interface redesign. The infusion pumps are commonly used in the healthcare settings to deliver fluids, medication, and nutrients to patients. However, infusion pumps are notorious for outdated or poorly designed user interfaces that have contributed to medical errors and adverse events. The Human Factor study was an evaluation of the usability of a new pump interface. Participants included various healthcare professionals, including nurses and physicians, and it was executed in a simulated use setting. This means the study mimicked as many environmental conditions as possible. The initial study findings illustrated that there was an unclear alarm notification, the programming menus were really complicated, and the healthcare providers had difficulty in setting pump parameters appropriately. The feedback from the study was taken and the design was modified to make the pump interface simpler to use and color-coded for alerts. Additionally, the device developers added a feature that allowed customized presets. With these modifications, the final human factors study supported a successful submission to FDA and a stellar product launch. My final example is based on a plagiocephaly helmet for children. I find this one really interesting because it not only had healthcare providers as users, but we also had to evaluate the age of the children that could tolerate a new treatment methodology. Plagiocephaly helmets are typically created from the mold of a child's head out in an outside lab. This product specifically was a helmet that can be custom made in the physician's office, thus eliminating treatment delay due to helmet construction. Our human factors study on this evaluated the healthcare provider's ability to mold an acceptable helmet in the office. The participants included both nurses and physicians, and we also had to perform this study with children ages 1 month to 2 years participating in the study. Our study found that the healthcare providers consistently produced acceptable helmets, or they understood if the helmet was unacceptable. I think this is an important point to emphasize. A user interface doesn't always necessarily have to be successful 100% of the time. But if it is not successful, the user must understand that a mistake has been made. Additionally, we found that children under the age of 4 months old did not have enough head and neck control to tolerate the process. The study concluded that the healthcare providers could successfully make a helmet in the office as long as the patient was 4 months or older. During this presentation, we've talked about FDA's expectation for a human factor study, things to consider as you design your study, and we've looked at examples of successful human factor evaluations. Now it's time to give you what I consider to be best practices for success with FDA. I have almost 3 decades of working in the medical device space, and I'm going to outline what I have found to be successful in supporting an FDA submission. First, early in the process, do your engineering study. This is where you have early interdisciplinary design review meetings to assess the human factor risks. Key factors to success include appropriate identification of the risk and incorporation of feedback into both product design and product labeling. After you think you have the right design, do a formative study. Formative evaluations are interactive sessions with users. This type of study is a great way to focus on those areas where design options for the user interface have not yet fully been finalized. You may need to do several formative studies in order to get everything right. This is absolutely an iterative process of observation and modification until you get the results you desire. After you have designed the user interface, identified critical tasks, and written a human factors protocol that will challenge your device, I strongly recommend submitting that protocol to FDA via a Q submission. A Q submission will result in written feedback from FDA anywhere between 60 to 70 days. Additionally, you can also request a teleconference with FDA where you can clarify any issues that have arisen in FDA's written feedback. Gaining FDA's feedback before you execute the final human factors summative study will be critical to your success. Finally, we've done all of our homework, and now it's time to execute the summative human factors protocol. We train our users as we intend to do in a clinical setting. The users then execute the task with no interference or support from study moderators. A summative study is only considered complete if the user successfully interfaced with the device with the expected outcome with no outside intervention or monitoring. I've seen many times where a summative study is converted back to a formative study because designers had to intervene with users and gain more feedback on the user interface. However, once the summative study is successfully executed, it is this report that is submitted to FDA to support a marketing submission. Now let's summarize our conclusions. Imagine a world where every medical device, drug, or healthcare system was designed with thoughtful consideration for human interactions. That's the world of human factors studies aims to create. By designing and executing a strong human factors study, we ensure that we are enhancing user safety, device effectiveness, reducing errors in the clinic, improving user compliance, and mitigating use-related risks. Since we are all here because we care about the patients, this seems like a good investment of our time and energy. Thank you so much for your time today, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about human factors studies.